Number 5. The Great Omar. The Great Omar was a one-of-a-kind, tailor-made collection of Omar Khayyam's poetry. So if you're looking to score this at your local Barnes & Noble, you might have a bit of trouble. It was commissioned by the owner of a British bookshop, whose sole request was that it would be the greatest modern binding in the world. You know, nothing too lofty though. The book itself is made of 5,000 pieces of leather, 1,000 different gemstones, 100 square feet of gold, and some pages too, I guess. I think there's poetry inside there. The final book was priced for roughly $150,000 after finishing, so it's a pretty expensive book. But what makes it so cursed? Well, when the Great Omar was purchased, it was bought by an American buyer and had to take a transatlantic trip on a little ship called the Titanic, a boat which, as far as I know, has never been involved in any sort of historical events of note whatsoever. The Great Omar was never recovered from the wreckage and sank with the ship. 10 weeks after the book kissed the ocean floor, the man who bound it, Francis Sangorski, drowned while on vacation at only the age of 37. A little suspicious, isn't it? A bookbinder in the 1930s tried to recreate the Great Omar, Stanley Bray. He finished the second iteration just in time for World War II to begin. The book was placed in a vault on London's Fore Street, which was one of the first sites to be bombed. I guess they heard about the book. The safe that held the book endured through the Blitz, but the safe's contents and the second Great Omar was incinerated and lost to the war. A third version has been crafted and is currently being held in a vault in the British Library, although given the book's history, I don't feel like I would be too comfortable spending any time around it if I didn't have to. Hey, liking what we do here at Top 5 Scary? Well, we always love a little subscribe. Toss one our way. Number 4. The Grand Grimoire. Another book you're probably gonna have some trouble finding on Amazon. The Grand Grimoire is a tome of black magic. No one can agree on when the grimoire was originally birthed into this world, with people claiming that it could have been written anywhere from the 15th century to the 19th century. No one knows who even wrote the Grand Grimoire. Perhaps it merely appeared one day from another world, tantalizing and asking to be read. Some urban legends claim that the book was written by a man possessed by the devil himself, acting as a vessel for his will to pen his musings. The book itself contains instructions for would-be warlocks to summon all manner of demons and sinister servants of the underworld, even including guides on how a fledgling necromancer could learn how to raise a spirit from the dead. Now, if all that sounds appealing to you, it's said that even so much as cracking the spine of the Grand Grimoire is enough to seal your soul to damnation, the literary equivalent of promising your soul to the underworld. The church, obviously, sought out to quell the rising threat of the Grand Grimoire's dark musings, and it is said that the original Grand Grimoire, gosh, that is fun to say, is currently being held sealed in the Vatican's legendary vault, where it shall never again be seen by prying eyes, or those wishing to uncover its many dark secrets. There are alleged excerpts that have been reprinted and made available, but the full Grand Grimoire itself hasn't been seen by anyone in what would be centuries. Perhaps for good reason too. I mean, if the myths and legends around the book are to be believed.
Coming in at 3, The Green Man, Kingsley Amis. Published back in 1969 by British author Kingsley Amis, The Green Man is often described as being 3 genres of novel in one: ghost story, moral fable, and comic novel. It is essentially a pastiche of a Jameson ghost story by a hardcore fan. The story follows Maurice Allingston, a man who has reached middle age and is haunted by death. It opens with Maurice's father dropping dead and continues as friends and family convene for the funeral. Now his problems are many and increasing throughout the story. How to deal with his own declining health, how to reach out to a teenage daughter who watches TV all the time, how to find another drink, and then of course, death. It's a ghost story but also a black comedy. It's confusing, yes, but also one of the best books on our list, and certainly worthy of your attention if you dare. Coming in at 2, The Ritual, Adam Neville. If you're familiar at all with the Netflix film of the same name, you'll be surprised to see this on our list, and so high. Now that's not me diminishing the film in any way, but once again I'm straying from the popular and focusing on the unknown. Now The Ritual of course gained notoriety after the release of the film, but prior to that it was a hidden horror gem. The book follows 4 old university friends as they set off into the Scandinavian wilderness of the Arctic Circle in an attempt to reconnect with one another and escape their problems. However, tensions begin to arise within the group, and with little experience between them, a shortcut during their hike turns into a nightmare scenario that could cost them all of their lives. Things descend into madness when the group stumbles across an old habitation. Ancient artifacts decorating the wall and bones scattered upon the floor. It's haunting, and the last quarter of the book departs radically from what happened leading up to it, and the ending does not arrive until the final sentence of the book. It's chilling and just downright perfect. And finally, coming in at number 1, The Beckoning Fair One, Oliver Onions. Oliver Onions is among the greatest practitioners of the traditional English ghost story in the Silver Age. What tells these stories apart from more recent horrors is that they are not crude, they are slow and subtle. The Beckoning Fair One tells the story of a young down-and-out novelist who leases rooms in a decaying house, in the hopes of completing his masterpiece. However, as all classic ghost stories go, he discovers that he is not alone. But what makes this story truly frightening is that he is happy about it. Now, much like our previous numbers, the Beckoning Fair One is a little tricky to track down, but the best way to obtain it is by purchasing a copy of Anita Miller's anthology, 4 Classic Ghostly Tales, in which it appears alongside other masterpieces.
Number 5. House of Leaves. Coming up first today is going to be the novel House of Leaves, a very unconventional and postmodern horror novel written by Mark Z. Danielewski. The novel is a bit of a complicated read and even more complicated to explain, but I'll do my level best. It tells the story of a mysterious and ever-changing house that becomes the focus of obsession. The book contains multiple narratives and layers, intertwining storylines, like I said, postmodern. But the main storyline revolves around a man named Johnny Truant, who discovers a manuscript titled the Navidson Record, written by a deceased man recounting experiences with a photographer named Will Navidson, who moves with his family into a house that defies the laws of physics. The house appears larger on the inside than it does the outside, with rooms and hallways that shift, expand, contract, defying all physical laws of the world, while our protagonist becomes obsessed with the text, leading him down a rabbit hole of madness and self-reflection. The book too includes various academic and critical and essays, footnotes, appendixes, analysis to make the book seem more real and to get you really intertwined in all these spinning narratives playing out at once. It's a very cool usage of the medium. So this is a pretty complicated book and not an easy text at all, and adapting it I think would be a Herculean task. But I think it could be done. After watching the Canadian indie horror classic Skinamarink, I think with the right team you definitely could make it. Skinamarink was a super unique horror movie about a house that has its doors start to disappear overnight, in a similar vein to that kind of surrealist horror from House of Leaves. I think if a movie isn't on the table too, a limited Netflix or HBO series would be perfect for something like this. An extended runtime would help pack in all that intricacy that the book demands, and would be great for fans to dig in, speculate, discuss each episode as they air. I could totally see this being like a big sleeper hit with indie horror fans, a little smaller scale budget for some surrealist scares. And if you're looking for more stories about books that have already been made into horror movies or anything else in the world that's freaky, seriously, if you can think of something scary, the odds are pretty good we've done 2 or 3 videos on it. We've got all of that and then some. Make sure you hit subscribe. Please ring that little bell next to the subscribe button so you don't miss a single one of our videos. And I know I'm asking a lot here, but do that at the end of this one because I got 4 more books coming up for you right now. Number 4. Tender is the Flesh. Coming up next is going to be the novel Tender is the Flesh, a dystopian novel written by Argentinian author Agustina Basterrica. Set in a grim and unsettling future, the story explores a world where animals are infected with a virus that makes them lethal to consume, leading to a massive shift in the food industry. Maybe it's just the last couple years, but I feel like stories about viruses affecting the whole planet just aren't hitting the same way anymore. I feel like that's kind of been ruined. The novel centers around Marcos, a middle-aged man who works at a processing plant for special meat. In a society where we can't eat animal meat, but a demand for meat still exists, I think you can see where this is going, human flesh consumption becomes an alternative to consuming animals. Humans are bred like livestock, raised and slaughtered for their meat the way we treat cows and pigs. The book is basically vegetarian propaganda, and it does raise a lot of thought-provoking and, I'll say it, downright unsettling explorations of things like dehumanization, the ethics of the food industry, the consequences of a society driven by profit and overconsumption. I know, like, you know, Freddy Krueger and Michael Myers are pretty scary, but overconsumption is actually scarier than either of them. It's one of those stories that works as a good, uncomfortable reflection of ourselves. I think it would be perfect for a movie. The story is compelling, the themes are uncomfortably indicative of our society. It's the kind of thing that would get people talking. You'd leave the theater talking to your friends about it. There's a ton to analyze, and also I think this novel's premise is so horrifying, but imagine some of that brought to life, you know? Imagine the images of this. Sets of a human meat processing factory, people on a factory line being processed. Oh, PETA would love it, I tell you that. You probably get them to fund this. Just describing it like this sounds absolutely gut-wrenchingly disgusting. I couldn't imagine it on the big screen, but I could really easily see this becoming an A24 indie, super esoteric horror movie that all your cool friends are talking about at parties. Number 3. The Book of Abramelin. The Book of Abramelin, and I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, I'm sure one of you ghouls and goblins will let me know, or the Book of the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage, if you're not into that whole brevity thing, is an allegedly magic text that is thought to have been written at some point during the 14th century. It wasn't until the 19th century that it became recognized for its power, when the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn translated the book into English in the late 1890s. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and you're wondering which Final Fantasy that's from, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was a secret society devoted to the study of the occult and spiritual development. From here, the book became a key text in occultism, supposedly even inspiring Aleister Crowley's system of magic. So what's inside the book? Any pop-ups? The book centers around an incredibly elaborate ritual aimed at allowing a practicing sorcerer to communicate with their holy guardian angel. The book theorizing that everyone has their own personal guardian angel, a celestial other half from another world, if you will. After the sorcerer summons their guardian angel and enjoys a honeymoon phase, the book describes a period of blissful intimacy, one needs to conquer every unredeemed spirit of the infernal regions, which sounds like a bit of a task. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of unredeemed spirit. Luckily, I think the angel helps out a bit. If the legends are true, then undoubtedly the information in this book isn't the kind of thing that should ever be falling into the wrong hands. I mean, that's just a general good piece of life advice. As a general rule of thumb, you shouldn't mess with demons unless you know what you're doing, okay? That's the kind of thing to leave up to professionals. For all of our sakes, you know? Number 2. The Voynich Manuscript. The Voynich Manuscript is one of the more interesting books on this list. It's named after the first public owner of it, Wilfrid Voynich. Unlike most of these cursed banned books, the Voynich Manuscript is actually something you can seek out and read via Yale University's online collection, and you are more than welcome to peer over its pages, although you might find it a bit of a difficult text to read, because the Voynich Manuscript is written in a language that no human being speaks or has ever spoken. Carbon dating suggests the manuscript was first written at some unspecified time during the 14th century, and all 240 of the manuscript's pages are written completely unintelligibly, so if you want to take a look at this thing and try and help us crack this, please be my guest. Adorning its pages are confusing illustrations that only serve to further its mysterious reputation, with most of the drawings looking like a cross between a Hieronymus Bosch painting and a fever dream kaleidoscope nightmare. The book has made its way through countless owners, a succession of kings and other powerful leaders, and yet in all the years of its existence, no one has even come remotely close to understanding just what the Voynich Manuscript is, where it came from, and what its purpose is. Is it cursed? Well, it's possible. Maybe it contains the instructions for all manner of demonic and occult magic and we just don't know how to read it yet. There are some people who believe that the Voynich Manuscript could have been written by an extraterrestrial entity and gifted to us. And there's even some legends that claim the manuscript has some sort of apocalyptic curse hidden inside its mysterious scrawlings. We might never know, unless you might be the one to crack it for us. Number 1. Codex Gigas. Codex Gigas? Gigas? One of you guys will tell me, I'm sure. Oft referred to as the Devil's Bible, is the biggest entry on this list. And not just for its renown. No, it's like literally the biggest entry on this list. It's 3 feet tall and weighs around 80 pounds. It wouldn't surprise me at all if the curse this book inflicts on you is a hernia. The Codex Gigas, which literally translates to giant book, is a medieval manuscript dating back to the 12th century. So what's the deal with the Codex Gigas? Well, legends tell the Codex was penned by a monk who had broken his vows, and to repent for his sins, he was sentenced to be walled up alive. He promised, as an apology, that he would write a powerful book to glorify the monastery, and his book would contain all known human knowledge at that point. Everything. The original Wikipedia, and he wasn't even asking for donations. The legend continues that the monk, realizing that this task was a bit lofty, even for the quickest of scribes, reached out for some help co-authoring his mighty manuscript. He reached out and prayed, but not from God, but instead from Lucifer, asking for help finishing the book in exchange for his eternal soul. I'm starting to understand why he was sentenced for breaking his vows. Not really the best plan if you're looking to redeem yourself in the eyes of the church by making a deal with the devil, but hey, We've all done pretty crazy things trying to make a deadline, I totally get it. It's said that Lucifer himself helped complete the book, and the monk drew a portrait of the devil himself as thanks. That's where the book gets its name, the Devil's Bible. The book is replete with occultism, dark rituals, and imagery. I mean, after all, it's said to contain the entirety of the knowledge of the human race up to this point. So who's to speak what sort of sinister secrets are kept between its giant pages? There were estimates and tests to try and recreate the manuscript, suggesting that even one man writing, without illustrations, would have taken the better part of 2 decades to write the calligraphy present inside that book. So did this monk have some otherworldly help? Maybe just a huge stack of Red Bull? And what is inside this book? If your Latin's any good, the manuscript is kept on display in the National Library of Stockholm. Just be careful what you read. You got no idea what you could bring into this world.
Number 5 on this list is Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. You may be familiar with this title because there was actually a movie adaptation that hit the screen super recently. Back in 2019, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark came out in film format. But this movie was based off of a book, and for the longest time, this book was super banned. SCMP says this one stands out on the list because unlike the other banned or challenged books, Scary Stories is not political and it doesn't contain any references to drugs or sex. So why were these collections of horror stories so controversial? Some of the stories could be pretty scary and parents felt that they were inappropriate for their children, which is fair considering these are stories about being buried alive, cannibalism, and way more. But for many people, the real issue was the artwork by Stephen Gammell, an incredibly talented illustrator who no doubt caused nightmares for thousands of children since the book's first publication in 1981. So literally, guys, this book got banned because it was too scary. Think about that for a second. The author literally did too good of a job at making a horror book that people thought no one should read it. If I was the guy who wrote this, then I wouldn't know whether to take that as a compliment or like a criticism, to be honest. The people who banned this thing couldn't hold it down forever though, because at the end of the day, it is some great literature for those who love horror. Number 4 on this list is Fire and Fury. Now, this one I felt like I had to bring up because it happened really recently with the former president of the United States. Skyscape says Wolf's gossipy tell-all describes a dysfunctional presidency perpetually in chaos, zoning in at one point on the day the FBI director James Comey was fired. Comey heard about it on TV. Not all of Wolf's claims are accepted as truth, of course. Trump said he didn't authorize Wolf's White House access and didn't speak to him for the first book. Trump's lawyer Charles Harder sent a cease and desist letter threatening a libel lawsuit in an effort to stop publication. Fire and Fury sold out in its first day of a release as a result. By 2021, Trump was speaking to Wolf for Landslide, Wolf's 3rd book in the trilogy. There were countless scandals during the Trump administration, so I feel like this one was just another notch on the belt. Either way though, the government literally did everything in their power to try and get rid of it and stop us from being able to buy it. The opposite happened though, and because it got so much attention, it flew off the shelves faster than they could print them.
Number 3, the Atrocity Archives. Coming up next is going to be the Atrocity Archives by Charles Stross. Now, Charles Stross has got to be one of the best working horror authors out there, and possibly this is one of the better examples of his writings, the Atrocity Archives. It's the first book in the Laundry Files series, which is a fun blend of sci-fi, fantasy, espionage, just a little bit of twist of corporate meddling, all sorts of genres all mixing in one big book soup. The story is set in a modern day world where magic and Lovecraftian horrors exist alongside advanced technology, which is something I just go, I was gonna say but I can't say that. Why did I say it anyway? Which is something I love. I love a blend of science and magic. The Dresden Files hit me right here. Love that stuff. The protagonist of the Atrocity Archives is Bob Howard, a low-level IT tech working for a government agency known as the Laundry. Kind of like a Men in Black sort of deal. The organization is hidden away from the public public eye, and their job is to protect the world from supernatural threats and to prevent the accidental summoning of eldritch entities that could destroy humanity, you know, stuff like that. Howard gets himself involved in a massive conspiracy, learning that certain mathematical algorithms can inadvertently open portals to other dimensions, allowing monsters into our world. Discovering as well that there exists an organization called the Black Chamber, which seeks to exploit these otherworldly creatures for their own gain, even at the cost of humanity. All of that to say, this is the perfect pitch for a genre-bending horror summer classic. People love the Men in Black movies, and I know those are a lot sillier than what this is, but this could very easily fill a similar niche with a Lovecraftian angle. People go crazy for cosmic horror stuff, conspiracies, corporate espionage, wizards, high tech. It's got a little bit of something for everyone to love inside the story. As well, because this is the first in a series of books that are all in a shared world, this hypothetical movie, if it ended up doing really well, Hollywood could do their favorite thing and make some sequels. You could have 9 movies out of this. You could have a horror blockbuster franchise on your hands if you adapt this properly. Number 2, Hex. Our next entry coming at the number 2 spot is Hex. Hex is a horror novel written by Dutch author Thomas Olduvelt. The story takes place in the picturesque town of Black Spring, located in the Hudson Valley of New York. Of course, this being a horror novel, the town has a dark secret. A 17th century witch named Catherine Van Wyler haunts the area, with her eyes and mouth sewn shut. Now, this novel follows the lives of the townspeople who have lived under her curse for centuries. The witch's presence is pervasive, and her malevolent influence is felt by everyone in town. The residents of Black Spring have implemented strict rules and surveillance to ensure the witch remains contained and hidden from the outside world. However, things take a sinister turn when a group of rebellious teenagers decides to break the town's rules and begin to spread Catherine's haunting image beyond Black Spring. As a result, the witch's powers intensify, causing unrest and chaos to the town's inhabitants. Now, while I was describing that to you, does that not already sound like the premise for a great horror movie? I mean, come on, witches with their eyes sewn shut? I'm getting spooked just reading about it. Now, if you thought that sounds like a good horror movie, you and I aren't the only ones, because the film rights for this were bought by Warner Brothers sometimes in 2016. So what's happening? What's taking so long? This seems like the easiest setup and knockdown in Hollywood history. Cast, I don't know, Vera Farmiga as the witch or something. Go out in the woods, film something remote on a small budget, you got a summer hit. Why isn't this script being made? Do you guys need me to write it? I'm willing. My schedule's pretty open right now. Warner Brothers, shoot Top 5 Scary a DM, have your folks talk to my folk. Tay's looking for work. My rate is very, very affordable. At number 1, The Mountain of Madness. And finally, at our number 1 spot is going to be The Mountain of Madness by H.P. Lovecraft, the legendary horror novelist and racist. H.P. Lovecraft is one of the most influential horror writers of the modern age. Stephen King has been very outspoken about how Lovecraft is one of his driving inspirations, and just about every cosmic horror story published since owes a debt of gratitude to the tentacled horrors Howard Phillips dreamed up. While there have been adaptations of his works before, some adapted more contemporary, some keeping the original settings, surprisingly, however, one of his most famous works, At the Mountain of Madness, is still awaiting the film treatment. The Mountain of Madness is one of Lovecraft's best works, following a team of scientists that are in a remote part of Antarctica and discover ancient alien ruins, meeting ancient old ones and their civilization trying to escape back to society. It's got all the best Lovecraft beats that you love. It's got fear of the unknown, humanity's insignificance, technology versus spirituality. It's fantastic and has all the makings of a big movie. So what's happening? Well, Guillermo del Toro, Oscar-winning director and lover of monsters, has said before that At the Mountain of Madness is his dream project. He's actually been developing a version of it since 2006, but the project has clearly been in development hell. At one point, Tom Cruise was attached, produced by James Cameron, which would have made like $1 trillion, but it doesn't exist, unfortunately. Some test footage of the film is all that's ever been shown, and it's some pretty cool footage of a CGI monster, so you know that the designs for this movie would have gone off like crazy. Unfortunately, nothing has ever come of it. Will it still come someday? Del Toro has said never say never, but his optimism for the project isn't high, and has said that his vision for it has changed so much that he'd have to rewrite the whole script. If you simply can't wait, The Cabinet of Curiosities on Netflix is very Lovecraft inspired, and is great proof that Guillermo is absolutely the #1 director to do a Lovecraft movie. Well, After 1980s John Carpenter, but he's not making movies anymore.
Coming in at number 5, we have Cthulhu's Reign by Daryl Schweitzer. Cthulhu's Reign is an anthology of original horror short stories edited by Daryl Schweitzer. The book collects 15 short stories by various authors with an introduction by the editor. They all share the Cthulhu mythos setting originated by H.P. Lovecraft, with the twist that the dreaded revival of the fearsome Great Old Ones who once ruled the earth have finally come back to take it back, taking the mythos from the realm of contemporary horror into that of apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic fiction. Some of the darkest hints in all of H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos relate to what will happen after the Old Ones return and take over the earth. In the Dunwich Horror, the semi-human half-breed Wilbur Whately speaks in his diary of travelling to non-human cities at the Earth's magnetic poles when the Earth is cleared off, and hints at his own promised transfiguration. Very few mythos stories have ever touched on this. What happens when the stars are right? The sunken city of R'lyeh rises from beneath the waves, and Cthulhu is unleashed upon the world for the last time. What happens when the other Old Ones, long since banished from our universe, break through and descend from the stars? What would the reign of Cthulhu be like on a totally transformed planet where mankind is no longer the master? It won't be simply the end of everything, it will be a time of new horrors and of utter strangeness. It will be a time when humans with a taint of unearthly blood in their ancestry may come into their own. It will be a time foreseen only by authors with the kind of finely honed imaginative visions as those included in Cthulhu's Reign. I don't want to reveal too much or give away any spoilers, but this is definitely one for the reading list. In at number 4, The Croning by Laird Barron. As one of the most prolific contributors to contemporary cosmic horror, Barron has not only written tons of short stories in the subgenre, but some full-length novels as well. The Croning tells the story of Donald Miller and his wife Michelle, who have been married for nearly half a century and travelled all over the world. In Michelle's relentless pursuit of odd anthropological findings, Don has always trailed her happily from what he can remember at least, but now, at the age of almost 80, he's starting to realise that something about Michelle isn't quite right. Now all things must converge. Donald will discover the dark secrets along the edges, unearthing savage truths about his wife Michelle, their adult twins, and all he knows and trusts. For Donald is about to stumble on the secret of the Croning. Strange things exist on the periphery of our existence, haunting us from the darkness looming beyond our firelight. Black magic, weird cults, and worse things loom in the shadows. The children of Old Leech have been with us from time immemorial, and they love us. If you haven't read Laird Barron yet, I would recommend starting with short stories first to get acquainted with his peculiar style, but if you're looking to take that relationship to the next level, The Croning is what you need.
Number 3 on this list is Lawn Boy. This story, written by Jonathan Evison, is one of the most challenged books in America in 2021, and honestly, folks, it really shouldn't be. Esquire says Lawn Boy is the big-hearted story of Mike Munoz, a young Chicano striver working on a landscaping crew in Washington. As Mike fights against the soul-crushing forces of classism and racism to achieve his American dream, he also comes to terms with his sexual identity. Though the novel was written for an adult audience, teens fell in love with Lawn Boy, leading it to be awarded an Alex Prize, an award bestowed by the Young Adult Library Services Association to books written for adults that resonate with teens. Critics slammed the book for the LGBTQ content and sexually explicit material, pointing to a sexual encounter between two young men. Evison has received hate mail and death threats as a result of campaigns to ban his book, but he remains uncode. When I look at the wealth of great literature that enlightened souls have sought to ban through the ages, how could I feel anything but pride to be listed among them, he wrote. To those who would ban my book and burn me at the stake because they are ashamed of their own past experiences or uncomfortable with any non-binary sexual identifications, I hope you find healing. And literally, guys, shout out Jonathan on that one. When I found out that this book was something that people were trying to ban in literally 2021, it kind of blew my mind. Like, sometimes I think that the world is past stuff like that, and I do want to say that I think most people are. Like in America, 87% of people don't think that books should get banned. So at the very least, regardless of their views on things, they think that there should be a freedom of speech or writing. Either way, the government hasn't actually forbidden you from reading this book. People tried to do that. And I say, you shouldn't listen to them. Number 2 on this list is Animal Farm. So if you wanted to read Animal Farm now, then you probably wouldn't have too hard of a time getting your hands on a copy. But back in the day, this wasn't always the case. In fact, the government for a long time wanted nothing to do with the book. Spyscape says Animal Farm was a target of censors and spies. The satire revolves around farm animals who rebel, hoping to create an equal society. Instead, they end up living under Napoleon, a dictatorial pig. The USSR saw it as a critique of its politics and banned the book. The UAE briefly banned Animal Farm because of its talking pigs seen to be against Islamic values. The CIA, meanwhile, turned it into a propaganda tool and funded an animated movie of the same name, although spies changed the book's ending. If we think about it logically for a second, it makes sense why a government wouldn't want Animal Farm to get read by the general public. This is especially heightened when we think about it from the perspective of a controlling government like the USSR was. In their brain, they probably saw this book as a bit of a threat. The public reads it and then starts getting some sneaky ideas about how they're going to revolt and start their own new country with a totally new government. And then this even goes a step further because the CIA started pushing this book and marketing it as something against the USSR. What was a fictional story turned into this whole political thing caught between the two biggest superpowers in the world when it was released. And number 1 on this list is the Anarchist Cookbook. This book has had a roller coaster of a life since it was written. Big Think says, since it was first written in 1971, much of its information is out of date. But some topics, like how to make improvised bombs, don't have an expiration date. The book provides instructions for making LSD and tear gas, primers on how to operate various firearms, how to sabotage different kinds of infrastructure, and writing on anarchist philosophy. The book was written by William Powell, a manager of a bookstore in Greenwich Village. Powell quit his job, however, to write the Anarchist Cookbook. My motivation at the time was simple, said Powell in an article for The Guardian. I was being actively pursued by the US military, who seemed single-mindedly determined to send me to fight and possibly die in Vietnam. Its countercultural, violent message proved popular today. It is sold in excess of 2 million copies. It should come as no surprise that the book is infamous and controversial, but the kinds of criticism it attracts varies depending on the source. Governments across the world clearly have a negative opinion of the book. It does, after all, advocate for violent civil disobedience. The Anarchist Cookbook is banned in Australia. In the UK, possessing the book, though not illegal itself, has often been used as evidence in terrorism cases. A teenager was accused of and later acquitted of a plot to assassinate British National Party members in 2008. In 2017, a 27-year-old who had traveled to Syria and possessed a copy was accused of being a terrorist. It turned out that he had merely printed a copy of the Anarchist Cookbook for use in a role-playing game in a university society. So clearly the government does not like this book at all. I think it's a bit much for people to be accused of certain things just by owning the book, but I also kind of see why it happens based on the contents of the text. Just be aware that if you pick this book up, then the government may start keeping tabs on you.
Number 5. The Book of the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage. The Book of Abramelin, or more formally, the Book of the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage, is a Jewish magic text that is thought to date back at some point in the 14th or 15th century. Now, it wasn't this initial publication that gave it such a notoriety. There wasn't really a lot of book reviewing going on back then. It was when it was upheld by the 19th and 20th century magicians who made up the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which kind of sounds like a fake bad guy from an RPG, but is a British secret society dedicated to the practice, research, and upholding of old occult magic ways. Can't be that secret though, because I'm talking about it. One of the founders of the Golden Dawn, one SLM Matters, created the first ever English translation of the book in the 1890s, drawing from a 17th century French translation. Mathers' translation became the definite magic text of the 19th century, eventually helping inspire Aleister Crowley, the legendary occultist and fixture of one of the best Ozzy Osbourne songs ever. There's all kinds of spells and magic inside the text. Some highlights include spells on how to conjure someone into a donkey, summon a monkey to do your bidding, how to bring forth spirits to fetch you goods. The key point in the text, however, is an epic multi-month ritual that, if performed correctly, will allow the sorcerer to commune with their guardian angel other half. The book posits that everyone's guardian angel is another part of their essence, a spiritual other. The ritual involves, I don't really know how to say this politely. You have to get blissfully intimate with the angel, and once this honeymoon period is over, the caster then has to summon up and conquer unredeemed spirits of the infernal regions of hell to conquer them, and then will be able to be master of the spirit domain. That all sounds pretty complicated though, honestly, so all things considered, maybe it's for the best that this one's locked away. I don't really need to mess with magic, that's above my pay grade, and I'm not looking to get too intimate with my significant other guardian angel anytime soon. But if you're looking for more true tales of terror, fake frightening fibs, cursed relics, ancient evils, ancient cryptids, aliens, conspiracies, ghouls, goblins, and way more of this guy, Top 5 Scary is the only place to be. So stay subscribed, make sure you hit that little bell so you don't miss a scream, but, and I know this is a big ask, do that at the end of this video, because I got 4 more cursed books coming for you right now. Number 4, the Codex Gigas. When it comes to cursed and demonic books, the Codex Gigas is one of the biggest ones around. Like, literally. Codex Gigas translates to giant book, which isn't a very scary name, but when you see the size of this behemoth, it starts to make a bit more sense. The thing is massive, 2 feet long. While giant oversized illuminated manuscripts were fairly common around this era, this one stood out for its immense size and also the impressively scary rumors surrounding the cursed text. It's occasionally been dubbed Satan's Bible due to the interesting legend behind its origin. Now, supposedly the story goes that a monk by the name of Herman the Recluse, which same, honestly. Anyway, Herman was condemned to death for heresy and was to be walled up alive and starved. In a desperate plea to save himself, Herman tried to convince the prior and the abbot that if he could pen a manuscript to honor God's glory and contained all of human knowledge and history in one night, that he could be let free. The abbot agreed, thinking that this was, of course, an impossible task. Well, he didn't know that Herman was the John Wick of penmanship, who wrote until midnight, wearing his fingertips down, and in a moment of desperation, made a prayer to Lucifer, and asked for his eternal soul in exchange for the book's completion in order to repent for his heresy. I totally get it, you know? I've done some pretty crazy things trying to write my scripts in time for a deadline too. I sold my soul earlier this week to get Top 5 UFOs in on time. I get it. Now, not poking any holes in your logic here though, Herman, but I will say maybe selling your soul to the devil is part of the reason you got into this mess, because that actually sounds a ton like heresy. A variation of the legend states that Herman worked for years on the manuscript, day and night, but still asked for the devil's assistance anyway, the lazy bastard. Anyway, the legend states that Satan signed the Bible with an illustration of himself. The ego on that guy. The book contains a birth of information. Like they said, it was supposed to be everything humanity had attained up to that point. Now these days, the Codex Gigas is preserved in the Natural Museum in Sweden, where you can admire the line work of Herman the Recluse and his ghost author, Satan.
In at number 3 we have Dreams from the Witch House, edited by Lynn Jamnick. This anthology brings more fresh perspective to cosmic horror with 19 thrilling short stories, all by female authors. These range from pieces written years ago and now finding a new audience, such as Joyce Carol Oates' Shadow of the Evening, to works by up-and-coming authors like R.A. Kalin, who authored the final story in the collection Memoirus. The history of the old world is shrouded in secrecy. Creatures and forces unimaginable inhabited this realm for eons, long before any human navigated the surface of the earth. As the old ones have slumbered or observed from afar, humans have assembled civilization upon this fragile planet, yet the whispers from the elders have been growing stronger, their energy once again seeping into the world. These whispers are being felt throughout the earth. From the roots of our flora to the dreams of our children, they are preparing us for what is to come. Each story deconstructs or reshapes typical Lovecraftian elements in some way, tending tending to emphasize individual experiences rather than giving into overwhelming cosmic madness. As Jamnik notes in the introduction, such stories fill not only a narrative gap, also a huge cultural one, that of a female voices in cosmic horror. Some of the most exciting Lovecraftian fiction is currently being written by women, she writes. We're moving away from the elder old guard who in some ways as stifling to diverse perspectives of the unnameable as Lovecraft's own views on the number of topics. One critic wrote, I quote, "I recommend this collection to anyone who enjoys incredible weird fiction. I was not disappointed with any of the stories. The artwork that Sarah created for each story are beautifully rendered." In at number 2 we have The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor Lavelle. Praised as one of the most nuanced Lovecraft retellings in the 21st century, The Ballad of Black Tom begins in 1924 Harlem with the hustler Tommy Tester. Tom has always kept a low profile, even as a street musician, until the day he's recruited by a reclusive millionaire Robert Soydam, who wants Tom's help to manipulate a creature of inconceivable darkness. With the introduction of jaded New York detective Malone, this tale twists into a true nightmare, as Malone recounts findings that signify a completely changed world. Charles Thomas Tester hustles to put food on the table, keep the roof over his father's head, from Harlem to Flushing Meadows to Red Hook. He knows what magic a suit can cast, the invisibility a guitar case can provide, and the curse written on his skin that attracts the eyes of wealthy white folks and their cops. But when he delivers an occult tomb to a reclusive sorceress in the heart of Queens, Tom opens a door to a deeper realm of magic and earns the attention of things best left sleeping. Not only is this novella compulsively readable, it's also another significant contribution to the subgenre. As an African American man himself, Lavelle has noted that The Ballad of Black Tom is a conscious response to Lovecraft's racism and xenophobia, particularly in his story The Horror at Red Hook, upon which Lavelle's work is based. And indeed, by mirroring these prejudices in his book setting, which again is 1920s New York, Lavelle has created a brilliantly commentative and deeply resonant modern work that any reader can enjoy. The Ballad of Black Tom succeeds in being a compelling story that offers a new perspective and take on Lovecraft. Lavelle could put this spin on all Lovecraft's work and they should be a success. Despite a few serious moments, this is an entertaining read. And finally, in at number 1 we have Agents of Dreamland by Caitlin R. Kiernan. We'll wrap things up with an exceptional piece of cosmic horror by another female author, Caitlin Kiernan. In her novel Agents of Dreamland, a government agent called the Signalman attempts to gather information about an exclusive cult who call themselves the Children of the Next Level. The cult members consume strange fungi to physically elevate themselves, but as the Signalman finds out too late, these are no mere magic mushrooms, but biology warping weapons from another world. With plentiful body horror and a deeply disconcerting narrative style, this book is all of the best parts of Alia Whitley's The Beauty and Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-5, neatly paying tribute to classic science fiction in the same breath as Lovecraftian horror. In a ranch house near the shore of the Salton Sea, a cult leader gathers up the weak and susceptible, the children of the next level, and offers them something to believe in and a chance for transcendence. The future is coming and they will help to usher it in. A day after the events at the ranch house which disturbed the single man so deeply that he and his government sought out help from other sources, Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory abruptly loses contact with NASA's interplanetary probe New Horizons. Something out beyond the orbit of Pluto has made contact. A woman floating outside of time looks to the future and the past for answers to what can save humanity.
Number 5 on this list is Shams al-Marif. This book, from my findings, is not inherently evil in its teachings, but is one of those examples of potentially being a bit too much power for one person to possess. It's a 13th century Arabic grimoire written by Ahmed al-Buni. The book attempts to teach its readers how to perform ancient Arabic magic and is very spiritualistic. This book was super influential in Arabic culture and gained a large following. Many good things have come from this book, but also when you have a large amount of people following anything, some take it too far. Wikipedia writes, in contemporary form, the book consists of 2 volumes, Shams al-Marif al-Kubra and Shams al-Marif al-Sugra, the former being the larger of the two. The first few chapters introduce the reader to magic squares and the combination of numbers and the alphabet that are believed to bring magical effect, which the author insists is the only way to communicate with jinn, angels, and spirits. And that right there is one of the main teachings in this book, the ability to talk to spirits. The amount of scary stories that we've talked about on this channel though, in regards to people trying to communicate with the dead is crazy, and it shows just how often things like this can go wrong. This has obviously happened many a time with this book, and those trying to reach their departed loved one end up contacting a super dangerous demon. I don't think that there's anything morally wrong with contacting the dead, if the dead are okay with it of course, but it seems like doing this always ends up with something bad happening. This grimoire won't curse you just by simply reading it, but if you try and perform some of the rituals it suggests, then it's very likely that you could cause some serious harm to you or those that you love. I recommend just avoiding this book altogether. Number 4 on this list is Demonolatry Mystery. Now the book in question here is actually a fictional book, and therefore it would be actually impossible for you to read it anyways, even if you wanted to for some reason. But that being said, it doesn't change the fact that it's definitely cursed and extremely evil. If this book was real, then we would need to get rid of it as soon as possible because it teaches humans how to do some very dangerous things. The book is part of the Lovecraftian universe and made its first appearance in The Secret of the Tomb. The book isn't referenced too much in that story, but it's described in pretty good detail in the story The Black Bargain. In that book, it describes Demonolatry Mystery as something that told you how you could compound aconite and belladonna and draw circles of phosphorescent fire on the floor when the stars were right. Something that spoke of melting tallow candles and blending them with corpse fat, whispered of the uses to which animal sacrifices might be put. It spoke of meetings that could be arranged with various parties most people don't even believe in, with cold, deliberate directions for traffic with ancient evil. Drawing circles of fire, sacrificing animals, talking with ancient evil, this all sounds like pretty bad news to me. Especially the part that says you can arrange meetings with various parties. It's clear that not only can this book teach someone how to perform any number of spells and incantations, but some of those spells will deal with the summoning of ancient demons and creatures. And if we assume that this book is real and can be read, then that would also mean that the terrifyingly powerful gods Lovecraft wrote about would also be real. Meaning that this book could grant you the ability to summon Cthulhu or something even worse. Summoning your standard demon is already bad enough, but an all-knowing, super powerful god definitely raises the stakes a little bit. This book, from every description I can read about, sounds like something that's just far too dangerous for any human to use and wield safely. If it ever was real and you did happen to stumble upon it, best to avoid reading it at all costs.
Number 3. The Grand Grimoire. Our next entry has been formerly referred to as the Gospel of Satan. It's different from Satan's Bible, and is said to be a cursed book whose knowledge had to be sealed away to protect humanity. So this might be the most dangerous book ever published after Hop on Pop. The Grand Grimoire was said to have been penned by a priest in the 16th century who was possessed by a litany of demons who compelled the man to put their knowledge to paper. Acting as a scribe for the demons, the man wrote everything they knew about dark incantations, spells, instructions on how to cast rituals, how to bind a demon to make it do your bidding. Wait, a demon wrote this book? A demon gave instructions about how it wants to be bound to a human and serve humans? That's a freaky little demon. That's not all though. There's a step-by-step recipe for a little necromancy if you're down to dabble in some dark arts and make some bones dance to your rhythm. The book really covers all the fun stuff you've been told not to do. Now it's not all brimstone and hellfire too. There's rituals on how to manipulate your luck, how to conduct a seance, and I think this is adorable. But there's even ways to make people love you in the book. Now, a little dating tip from your friends at Top 5 Scary. I will say, if you need a demon's help to make them like you, that might not be the most successful relationship, but you do you, don't let me get in the way. Now, if all of this is sounding pretty appealing, and I don't blame you, because it all does sound really cool, just know that the book is considered high treason. Even so much as cracking the spine is considered equivalent to selling your soul, so maybe hold off on that Amazon order for a bit. Besides, because of the book's cursed reputation, the original copy is said to be locked away in the Vatican's famous secret archives, and no matter how many times you ask, they're not gonna let you look at it, even if you say you just want to take a quick little peek at the illustrations. I know, so unfair. Ugh, I don't even have any late fees. Let me take the book out. Number 2, the Untitled Grimoires. You think a book with a name is scary? Imagine a book without a name. Coming up next on our list of haunted nighttime reading is the Untitled Grimoires. It was so scary they couldn't even deign to give it a name. The books are said to originate from a Wiccan high priestess named Persephone Adrasta Irene, who has one of the coolest names I've ever heard. She recorded a book of her family's spiritual history. These manuscripts record Persephone's Wiccan history that she reworked all through her adult life. The first book contains around 250 pages of spells, incantations, curses, enchantments, and some information on gems, planets, rites, potions, and exorcisms. Basically anything and everything that a fledgling sorceress or warlock could ever possibly want. The second book is a little more light, the sequel's a bit of a letdown. It's just alchemy, chemistry, cures, perfumes, and tonics. Now the first book is believed to be the one to carry the curse, as Persephone's spells are believed in Wiccan culture to contain more power than most other records due to her embodiment of her own soul inside the book. They say all authors put a bit of soul in their work, and it seems as if the Wiccan High Priestess took that a bit more literally than most of us do. These books would eventually find their way into the possession of one Alice Montserrat, a close working associate of Aleister Crowley, who you know from earlier in the video as one of the most famous practicers of the occult and lover of white horses. Montserrat left an inscription in the first page of the book, warning to all of those who open it, "To those not of the craft, the reading of this book is forbidden. Proceed no further, or justice will exact a swift and terrible retribution, and you will surely suffer at the hands of the craft." This was written in several languages to make sure it came across to just about anybody who opened the book. Now I'm kind of unclear on that. I don't know, some of the old words, the old English is kind of confusing me. Does that mean the book should be read like it's good? I don't know, not really getting that. And finally, coming in at her #1 spot today on demonic dictionaries and evil literature is the infamous Lesser Key of Solomon. Make no mistake from the title, even though it's a Lesser Key of Solomon, it is not a lesser evil. It's an anonymously authored grimoire on demonology, so not written by Solomon. It's also known as Clavicula Salomonis Regis or Lemegeton, is a grimoire. It's a book of magic that gained significant prominence in occult literature. Now the grimoire is attributed to King Solomon, the biblical figure renowned for his wisdom and mastery over supernatural forces. It's believed to have been compiled in the 17th century, though it draws upon earlier occult tradition and texts. The Lesser Key consists of several sections, or books, each focusing on a different aspect of magic and summoning. The most well-known is the Ars Goetia, which represents descriptions and instructions for evoking 72 demons or spirits, each with its own unique powers and abilities, kind of like Pokemon. These demons are said to be bound by King Solomon and can be summoned and controlled by skilled practitioners. Other sections of the Lesser Key of Solomon includes fan favorites like the Ars Theurgia Goetia, Ars Paulina, Ars Almadel, and Ars Notoria. These sections delve into topics such as angelic invocations, the use of talismans and amulets, and rituals for obtaining divine knowledge and wisdom. Now the grimoire has had a profound influence on various occult and magical traditions, including ceremonial magic, demonology, and the practice of spirit conjuration. It's been studied and referenced by countless practitioners, scholars, and scary YouTubers throughout history. Now, goes without saying, this is a potentially dangerous text. The act of summoning and working with entities described in the grimoire is not for the faint of heart, and really should be saved for those with a bit of spiritual expertise under their wizard hat.
Alright, in our 5th spot we have The Call. This is a suspenseful fantasy fiction book published in 2016. This novel surrounds a world where every teen at one point in their life is transported to a Greyland. Doesn't seem that scary, right? Wrong. Well, when they reappear to their world, 9 out of 10 children return dead. And the few survivors that come back are disfigured or mentally and physically scarred. It is said that 3 minutes and 4 seconds is the amount of time that they vanish and then reappear. But to them, it's a whole 24 hours in this gray area. This novel surrounds the main character Nessa, who is trying to do everything she can to survive when she is called, although she is permanently on crutches due to polio. When you are transported to this land, you have to fight for your life against terrifying creatures whose main goal is to torture and kill you. There's kind of like a Hunger Games vibe to this book, except for it's not just a couple people from each district that get enlisted like in the Hunger Games. Instead, every teen has to go through it at any random moment. Now this Greyland is completely colorless. The grass will slice your feet and the trees will slice you open or rip off your skin. And the creatures want to disfigure you. If that's not scary already, here is a quote from the novel. "The pain is the most intense the boy has ever known. So bad bad that it drives him to his knees. His eyes roll in his skull, and he dislocates his own jaw in his efforts to scream. And the Sade, he pinches off the arms like lengths of putty before grabbing him by the knees and working the same horrible miracle. That's truly horrific. Coming in at number 4, we have The Troop. The Troop is a 2014 novel about a troop of boys going on a 3-day camping trip. Now, I wish that this novel was more lighthearted, like with the troops having a good time, maybe roasting a couple marshmallows, but it's way darker than that. Now, in this book, the Scoutmaster, Tim Riggs, leads a group of 5 teen boys to the Canadian wilderness. Apparently, this was a tradition for the group. However, things start to take a twist soon. While on this trip, they encountered a thin, very pale man. This man is eerily sick and gaunt and even coughs up slime. Upon cutting the man open, a giant worm slithers out. This worm then latches onto another boy and infects them. This novel continues with a troop of boys struggling for survival among this deadly bioengineered infestation. Even Stephen King left a review saying, "The troop scared the hell out of me, and I couldn't put it down." This is old school horror at its best. I mean, if the horror thriller writer Stephen King himself got spooked during this one, dang, good luck to you. This novel is fairly gory and psychologically scary. Although worms may seem like harmless creatures, in this book they are re-engineered for weaponization to infect and take control of the host's body. Sounds pretty terrifying to me.
Number 3 on this list is the Book of Abramelin. Abraham was an Egyptian mage who lived between 1362 and 1458 and dedicated his life to magic. Once Abraham visited Egypt, and there he met a magician, not that magician which you see on TV shows, but that who really knows dark magic and dark secrets. He told Abraham many dark and mysterious secrets and strange things which you and I can never imagine. He told him how to live the dead person, the location of under-earth treasures, how to contact devils. Besides this, he also told him the secrets of becoming invisible and flying in the sky. That last passage that I just read was written by Sharik Kamal while he was listing the most cursed books of all time. This book is known to be dangerous, and it isn't just because of the contents in it either. Yes, summoning the dead and performing dark magic in its own right is very dangerous and has the potential to cause serious problems for you and those around you. This book, though, may just be inherently cursed to begin with. Many people who have read this book, even those who don't go on to perform any of the rituals or incantations that the book describes, have gotten horribly bad luck afterwards. Like the second they opened up the book and started reading, their entire life just flipped on its side. Some have said that afterwards their home became haunted by some dark spirit and they had to move. It's almost as if the book itself is a portal to another demonic dimension, and just the action of opening it could cause something to leak out. I'm sure that Abraham was a great writer, but no book is worth dying over, so I won't be reading this one anytime soon. Number 2 on this list is the Great Omar. This book is believed to be the cause of one of the most tragic disasters in all of human history, sinking the unsinkable ship, the Titanic. No, you don't catch Leonardo DiCaprio reading this book in the 1997 movie version, but maybe he should have. This book, even though it is deeply cursed, is potentially the most ornate and beautiful books to have ever been created. In fact, it took over 2,500 hours to create this book, which translates to over 100 full days. One would think that a book of this kind would fetch quite the pretty penny, but that actually wasn't the case. In fact, the man who binded this book, Francis Sangorsky, had an extremely hard time trying to sell it to anyone. Finally, he did find a home for it in America and was in the process of sending it over there, but it never reached its destination though, because it was on the Titanic. Now, the reason that people think this book had something to do with the unsinkable ship sinking is because only a week or so after the ship had gone down, so did Sangorsky. He died by drowning to death a very short time after the book had also sunk to the bottom of the ocean. This is why people believe that something about this book will curse those around it and potentially lead to someone drowning. I personally think it's a bit of a stretch to just assume that having this book caused the entire Titanic to sink. However, it is a remarkable coincidence what happened to Sangorsky. It probably won't ever happen, but if this book ever did wash ashore one day, I wouldn't want to be the one to pick it up first. Number 1 on this list is the Book of Soyga. The Book of Soyga is one of the most complete collections of magic and dark magic that one could come across. Wikipedia writes, amongst the incantations and instructions on magic, astrology, demonology, lists of conjunctions, lunar mansions, and names of genealogies of angels, the book contains 36 large squares of letters which Dee was unable to decipher. Otherwise unknown medieval magical treatises are cited, including works known as the Liber E, Liber Os, Liber Dignus, Liber Sipil, and Liber Munob. So we'll get to those letters in a second because those play into the cursed nature of this book, but even without those, we're still dealing with a book that goes into depth on some pretty dangerous topics. The one that jumps off the page to me as being potentially problematic is demonology, the study of demons and the hierarchy to them, and also the study of how to potentially summon them. This is certainly problematic and already a reason to not read this book, but let's get back to those letters. In 1608 there lived a man named John Dee. John Dee was fascinated with this book and wanted to figure out how to decode the letters. He reached out to the angel Uriel, and Uriel told him that only the worthy one will be able to crack the code. Truly a chosen one scenario where the book will reveal its secrets to the one that it decides. John Dee tried to decode it anyways, but then a grim fate befell him and he died. Then, very mysteriously, the book disappeared from the face of the earth for almost 400 years, until it all of a sudden reappeared in 1994. Now, it's thought that trying to decode these letters could prove fatal if you aren't the one worthy to do so. There's over 7 billion people on the planet, so the odds that you're the one worthy one and won't die are pretty slim. Not the sort of odds that I'd want to take just to look at some strange medieval letters.
In at 5, A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. Published in 2015, A Head Full of Ghosts is a horror novel that involves an American family under strain when their 14-year-old daughter Marjorie exhibits signs of mental illness, with the story being told from the point of view of Marjorie's 8-year-old sister Mary. Now, we learn quite quickly that it is not mental illness, but is instead a demonic possession. Well, that's what we're told to believe anyway. With the family short on money, they agree to let a film crew into their home to shoot a reality show called The Possession about Marjorie and her upcoming exorcism. However, the show does nothing but tear the family further apart, and during this time, Marjorie drops a bombshell on her sister Mary that turns everything on its head. 15 years after the events, Mary recounts her tale in an interview and dark secrets surface, secrets that are absolutely terrifying. Any horror told through the eyes of a young child is haunting. Add possession into the mix and a forced reality show, well, now we have all the elements for a perfect horror novel. Now, unlike the rest of our numbers, Focus Features has optioned the rights to A Head Full of Ghosts, so here's hoping we see the story come to life on the big screen very, very soon. In at 4, The Fisherman by John Langan. First published in 2016, The Fisherman takes place in upstate New York in the woods around Woodstock, where Dutchman's Creek flows out of the Ashokan Reservoir, offering the promise of fine fishing and of something more, something far too absurd to be true. When Abe and Dan become fast friends after discovering their shared passion for fishing, they begin to hear rumors of the creek and what might be found there. They find themselves drawn into the tale and head towards Dutchman's Creek, where long buried secrets and a mysterious figure known as Der Fischer is said to remain. Now, The Fisherman is one of the best horror novels of not just 2016, but also the last decade. Now, sadly, this book will likely not be turned into a movie simply because John Langan took full advantage of the freedom of writing, with the narrative being wrapped in another narrative filled to the brim with giant monsters and dark magic, resembling the works of H.P. Lovecraft, specifically at the Mountains of Madness, which would be surprisingly easier to shoot, and that's saying a lot. Now, The Fisherman, though filled with horrifying elements, is about loss itself, and 2 men struggling to deal with their issues of loss and learning to carry on in the face of insurmountable grief. The Fisherman is a cosmic horror, unlike anything that has been penned before, with its mind-bending and heartbreaking tale of love, loss, and boundless horrors, making it the perfect addition to any horror lover's bookshelf. However, like I said, it's a cosmic horror, and at times even more intense than the works of H.P. Lovecraft. With the right director and all the money in the world, perhaps one day it will be brought to life. I have my doubts though.
Next up at number 3, we have Naomi's Room. Now, this novel was released in 1991. This novel surrounds a family whose 4-year-old daughter Naomi was kidnapped from a department store on Christmas Eve. She is eventually found dead, with her bloody clothes and body found in an alleyway. way. Throughout this book, as you try to figure out what happened to Naomi, more people get killed along the way, and more puzzling and scary things happen to Naomi's dad. Some scary events that they encounter are hearing footsteps in the attic, hearing whispers, or even seeing faces at the attic window. Then you even have a reporter that shows up and tells the family who they think is haunting them, and it can even be seen in vacation photos. So creepy. Here is a quote from the book. "Something is coming down the stairs. It is very slow, and I think it stops and listens every step or so. If I hold my breath and wait, I can almost hear it breathing. Please God, help me get through this. Help me get through tonight at least." This book does an amazing job at filling the reader's head with terrifying images when they read, definitely making it harder for them to sleep at night. It becomes even scarier when you find out the backstory of the house, and it will even make you wish that you never had an attic in your house. Moving on to number 2, we have the Amityville Horror. Amityville Horror is a 1977 novel written by Jay Anson. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of the Amityville hauntings before. In fact, there are several movies based on them. Well, this book is about the true experiences that the Lutz family have experienced. I think that's the main reason why it's so terrifying, because it's based on true claims from the family. Now, some people believe that the paranormal experiences that this family state are just made up, but either way, this book is bone-chilling. However, it is about the real-life story of Ronald DeFeo Jr., who shot and killed his family of 6 in their family home. After that, the Lutz family moved into this home and were terrorized by paranormal hauntings. The book describes some of the nerve-wracking things the family has experienced, such as George waking up at 3:15 every morning, which later they discovered was the time that Ronald killed his family. The book even talks about a small hidden room with walls that are entirely red, and it wasn't even on the original blueprints too, and they say that it just gave off an ominous vibe. Or even the fact that George said he saw his wife transform into a 9-year-old woman with tons of wrinkles and saliva dripping from her toothless mouth. Whether these accounts are real or not, this book will surely get to you. And in our number 1 spot, we have the book titled Intercepts. Intercepts is a 2019 psychological thriller novel written by T.J. Payne. This novel surrounds Joe, a man who works at a government facility that performs human experimentations. Things start to shift in Joe's life when these experiments start to go wrong and starts to seep into Joe's personal life. In fact, Joe's daughter Riley starts to have hallucinations like seeing a woman tearing her own skin off her face. This book doesn't stop there. It is filled with other terrifying visuals and gory details. It is definitely a mind bender, and I think the main reason it instills so much fear in individuals is due to the fact that we truly don't know what the government is up to. Like, we don't know if they're current human test subjects. I think the whole government conspiracy really adds on to the creep factor of this book. And in this book, the government is doing these tests to unlock abilities in the human mind. I mean, the government has been found guilty of doing inhumane tests in the past, such as in the 1940s, 11 employees were injected with malaria and then starved for 5 days, or when the US government in 1993 tested mustard gas and other chemicals on American troops. That is definitely a main reason why the book is so unnerving. And then you have the more supernatural aspect to it as well, from Joe and Riley's point of view, which seems like a haunting that is driving people insane. This fills them with terrible visions and hallucinations. As a result, it makes you almost feel like you're hallucinating too. This is definitely a thought-provoking book which does not have the happiest ending, so be warned.
In 5th place, we have the Lesser Key of Solomon, also known as Lemegeton Clavicula Salomonis, or simply Lemegeton. This is probably the book on this list that I'm personally most familiar with. I've definitely referenced it more than once for y'all, since it has some great info on demons and their personalities. For simplicity's sake, I'll just refer to it as The Key today. The Key is an anonymously authored grimoire on demonology that was compiled in the mid-17th century, mostly from materials up to 7 centuries older. It's divided into 5 books: Ars Goetia, Ars Thurgia Goetia, Ars Paulina, Ars Almadel, and Ars Notoria. The Key is based on the Testament of Solomon and the ring mentioned within it that he uses to seal demons. While most of us know specifically the Ars Goetia for, the 72 demons listed in the ranking, and I promise I'll get to the highlight reel in a moment. Now, while I don't have a technical definition for Ars, the Latin term Goetia refers to the evocation of demons or evil spirits, and is derived from an ancient Greek word meaning charm, witchcraft, or jugglery. In medieval and Renaissance Europe, Goetia was generally considered evil and heretical, in contrast Ars to Theurgia and Magia Naturalis, or natural magic, which were sometimes considered more noble. Okay, the 72 demons I promised. I promise I won't bore y'all and list them all, but some notable ones include King Baal, Duke Valfor, King Baleth, Duke Berith, Duke Astaroth, King Asmodeus, King or Count Fine, and Samael. The Ars Theurgia Goetia mostly references Trithemius's Steganographia, though the seals and order of the spirits are different due to corrupted transmission via manuscript. Rituals not found in Stenographia were added, and in some ways conflicting with similar rituals found in the Ars Goetia and Ars Paulina. Most of the spirits summoned are tied to compass points. 4 emperors are tied to the cardinal points of Carnisiel in the east, Amenadiel in the west, Demoriel in the north, and Caspiel in the south. And 16 dukes are tied to cardinal points, intercardinal points, and additional directions between those. There are in addition 11 wandering princes, so that a total of 31 spirit leaders each rule between several to a few dozen spirits. The Ars Paulina is derived from Book 3 of Trithemius's Stenographia and from portions of the Heptameron, but delivered by Paul the Apostle. Elements from the magical calendar, astrological seals by Robert Turner's 1656 translation of Paracelsus's Archidoxes of Magic, and the year 1641 indicate that this portion was written in the later half of the 17th century. Traditions of Paul communicating with heavenly powers are almost as old as Christianity itself, as seen in some interpretations of Corinthians and the apocryphal Apocalypse of Paul. Now, the Ars Paulina is divided into 2 books, the first detailing 24 angels aligned with the 24 hours of the day, while the second detailing the 360 spirits of the degrees of the zodiac. The Ars Amadel instructs the magician on how to create a wax tablet with specific designs intended to contact angels via scrying. And finally, the Ars Notoria contains a series of prayers intended to grant eidetic memory and instantaneous learning to the magician. Pretty dang thorough. In 4th place, we have the Grand Grimoire. It's a black magic grimoire, and for reference, a grimoire is a textbook of magic that typically, includes instructions on how to create magical objects like talismans and amulets, how to perform magical spells, charms, and divination, and how to summon or invoke supernatural entities such as angels, spirits, deities, and demons. In many cases, the books themselves are believed to be imbued with magical powers, although in many cultures, other sacred texts that are not grimoires, such as the Bible, have been believed to have supernatural properties intrinsically. Now, the only contents found in a grimoire would be information on spells, rituals, the preparation of magical tools, and lists of ingredients, and their magical correspondences. In this manner, while all books on magic could be thought of as grimoires, not all magical books should be thought of as grimoires. Different editions date the specific one to 1521, 1522, or 1421, but it was probably written during the early 19th century. Some experts suggest that 1702 is when the first edition may have been created, and a Bibliothèque Bleue version, similar to a chapter book, of the text may have been published in 1750. Now, the introductory chapter was authored by Antonia Venetiana del Rabina, who gathered his information from the original writings of King Solomon. Much of the material of this grimoire derives from the Key of Solomon and the Lesser Key of Solomon, which, our grimoire is attributed to King Solomon. Also known as Le Dragon Rouge, or the Red Dragon, this book contains instructions on how to summon Lucifer, or Lucifege Rofocal, for the purpose of forming a deal with the devil. The 19th century French occultist Eliphas Lévy, author of Dogmes et Rituels de la Haute Magie, claimed the contemporary edition of Le Dragon Rouge was a counterfeit of a true older Grand Grimoire. Gosh, I love petty historical spats. Now, the overall work is divided into 2 books. The first book contains instructions for summoning a demon and for the construction of tools with which to force the demon to do one's bidding. The second book is divided further into 2 more parts: the Sanctum Regnum and Secrets de l'Art Magique du Grand Grimoire. The Sanctum Regnum contains instructions for making a pact with the demon, allowing one to command the spirit without the tools required by Book 1, but at greater risk. Secrets contains simple spells and rituals one can employ after having performed the ritual of the first book. Some editions contain a short text between these 2 parts, known as Le Secret Magique ou Le Grand Art de Pouvoir Parler aux Morts, or in English, The Magic Secret or the Grand Art of Being Able to Speak with the Dead, which deals with necromancy. The book describes several demons as well as the rituals to summon them in order to make a pact with them. It also details several spells for winning a lottery, talking to spirits, being loved by a girl, making oneself invisible, and more. This book mentions the 3 greater demons, which are similarly prioritized in the Grimorium Verum. Sidebar: in the English translation of the work, the demons are referred to by the more generic term of spirits, which is a term I know some modern Satanists tend to prefer. The demons that are mentioned are the Emperor Lucifer, Prince Beelzebub, and Grand Duke Astaroth. Now, this work also makes mention of 6 lesser demons, and of course I'll mention them all. Lucifege Rofocal, Prime Minister; Satan Nachia, Commander-in-Chief; Agliarept, Commandant; Fleurity, Lieutenant General; Sargatanas, Brigadier Major; Nebulos, Marshal, and Inspector General.
In at 3, Haunted by Chuck Palahniuk. From the off, I should say that I read this novel when I was way way too young, and I do not recommend, because some of these chapters and short stories in the book will linger in your mind for quite some time. One story in particular I've never forgotten. You've been warned. First published in 2005, Haunted has a plot that has a frame story for a series of 23 short stories, most preceded by a free-verse poem, with each story being followed by a chapter of the main narrative. Yeah, it's confusing and perhaps why the book has never been turned into a movie, but I still have hope. It's also written by the guy who did Fight Club, and that got turned into a movie, so there's always hope. Anyway, the main story centers on a group of 17 people who have decided to participate in a writer's retreat after seeing it posted on a bulletin board of a cafe in Oregon. Now, I won't spoil this book for you, that would just be rude. However, I will say after some things go down, the 17 individuals become trapped in the home, and in turn begin to believe that an increase in their suffering will provide better stories for when they're eventually rescued. So without the gory details, some of the characters begin to engage in self-mutilation and cannibalism, all for a more interesting story. Haunted is a novel that explores how far some people will go for their art and the suffering from isolation. Now, it's no surprise this novel has not been turned into a movie. The description alone is enough to make some people cringe, but I still have hope that one day the likes of Eli Roth will nab the rights and bring something wonderfully gory to the big screen. In at 2, The Troop by Nick Cutter. The Troop is perhaps one of my favourite horror novels of all time, and that's a bold statement, especially coming from me, but it's the truth. Published in 2014, this horror novel follows Scoutmaster Tim Riggs and his troop of boys who once a year head into the Canadian wilderness for a 3-day camping trip. Comfortable, reliable tradition that of course makes for a perfect horror story. On the first night of their trip, an unexpected intruder stumbles into their camp. He's shockingly thin, pale, and worse, ferociously hungry, in turn exposing Tim and the boys to something far more terrifying than any ghost story. A bioengineered nightmare. A nightmare that spreads through the camp faster than fear itself. Now, I will not ruin this book for you because, like I said, this is one of my favourite horror books of all time. All you need to know is that the camp intruder, the human carrier of this virus, unleashes something truly disturbing onto the camp, something that will haunt my nightmares for years to come. It's disturbingly visceral, at times painfully descriptive, and terribly sad, all at the same time. It shows us the extremes young boys will go to when they meet something beyond any of their comprehensions. Now, if you don't want to take my word for it, the book even comes with Stephen King's stamp of approval. I quote, "The troop scared the hell out of me, and I couldn't put it down." In the acknowledgements of the book, Cutter even credits King's novel Carrie as an inspiration for the structure of his book. So you know you're in for a horrifying treat from the get-go. And what makes it one of the greatest of its time, it will never ever be predictable and deserves to be made into a horror flick that we can experience visually. And finally, in at number 1, Wielding Hall by Elizabeth Hand. Published in 2015, Wielding Hall is a terrifying horror that follows a British acid folk band that hold themselves up in Wielding Hall, an ancient country home with incredibly dark secrets. It is in this terrifying English estate that the band create their album that will garner them all the success. But at what cost? Julian Blake, the lead singer of the band, disappears from within the mansion and is never seen or heard from again. So, years later, the surviving members of the group, as well as a psychic, a photographer, and the band's manager, meet a young documentary filmmaker in order to tell their own versions of what went down in Wielding Hall and what really happened to Julian Blake. Of course, through the process of filming, dark secrets emerge about each member and their loved ones, making you question all of the characters you thought you could trust. Now, although the story may resemble the comfortable, familiar haunted house story, that is not the case. The book is framed as a set of interviews, something drastically unique to the classic haunted house structure. However, the interviews don't go as expected. What we expect is differing events, unique versions from different band members. But that's not the case. Each interview remains unswervingly consistent, with each person describing a ghostly young woman who was lured into the open by Julian's performance of a haunting folk song. Now, there are of course some gothic trappings, secret passageways, icy sensations, and constant uneasiness, all housed within a crumbling estate. This book is truly terrifying, take my word for it, and seeing it on the big screen would quite easily rival the fear felt in The Woman in Black and the horrifying horror show The Haunting of Hill House. Coming in at 5, The Haunting of Hill House, Shirley Jackson. Now, you may be surprised I included this book on our list, considering it jumped up in popularity following the release of the Netflix series of the same name. However, prior to this, the book wasn't as popular amongst all audiences, and was a lesser known ghost story that certainly deserves our attention. When we think about horror story cliches, we think haunted houses. It's the top of the list, an idea done so often it's frequently parodied. However, Shirley Jackson brought something entirely new with her book, The Haunting of Hill House, which is simply the best haunted house story ever written to date. Fact. Released back in 1959, Hill House is a gothic horror that tells the story of 4 seekers who arrive at a notoriously haunted house, under the order of Dr. Montague, an occult scholar looking for evidence of a haunting. At first, their stay seems destined to be nothing but a spooky encounter. However, Hill House is gathering its power and eventually chooses one of them to make its own. Guess who? It's an easy guess. Now, the book is vastly different to the show and arguably better, so if you want a fright, you should definitely check it out, even though this list is books you should avoid. But where's the fun in that? Coming in at 4, The Cipher, Kathy Koja. First published back in 1991 by Kathy Koja during a period of time where it was becoming clear that the likes of Stephen King weren't the future of horror fiction. So Koja took advantage of this by stripping the genre down to the basics. The Cipher tells the story of a black hole that spontaneously appears in the floor of a couple's apartment in Detroit. And of course, dreadful things begin to happen. Nicholas and Nikota are forced to set out to see what happens when they drop various items into the hole. But as they do, they discover everything they drop down comes back violently rearranged. Now, this book is a tough one to track down these days, but the only way to get hold of it is in ebook form, which is no fun at all. Here's hoping that publisher will eventually bring it back into print. They would be doing us all an invaluable service.
In third place, we have the complete book of Demonolatry. Written by S. Connolly, it boasts telling the reader how to discover powerful rites, magic, and practices that honor Satan and the demons. Now, this text, used by the traditional Demonolatry priesthood to train members of their covens, is part workbook, part textbook, and part reference book. It includes thorough chapters on demonology, history, demonic holy days, offerings, prayers, sigils, religious rites, and an introduction to demonolatry magic. Okay, this might be the first book I'm actually tempted to buy for myself. If only just to learn more about demonology history from someone that isn't Ed Warren for once. I love the Warrens and their work, but at the same time, it would be kind of neat to learn from a lens that isn't, as biased in Catholicism. Let's see what else it advertises. Learn how and why the ends, demonolatry sigils, ascension, and many other demonolatry methods have become standard practice among many theistic Satanists. It claims to guide students from pre-initiate to adept. It even delves into the depths of demonolatry, sex magic, necromancy, scarlet elixir rites, and red fluid sacrifice. See, that entire last phrase I can do without. Let me know what y'all think in the comments. Should I bother investing in it or not? In second place, we have the Grimorium Verum. The Grimorium Verum, which is Latin for true grimoire, is an 18th century grimoire attributed to one Alabek the Egyptian of Memphis, who wrote it in 1517. Like many grimoires, it claims a tradition originating with King Solomon. The grimoire is not a translation of an earlier work, with its original appearing in French or Italian in the mid-18th century, as noted already by A.E. Waite, who discussed the work in his book of ceremonial magic in 1911, stating that the date specified in the title of Grimorium Verum is undeniably fraudulent, since the work belongs to the middle of the 18th century and Memphis is Rome. Alrighty. One version of the grimoire was included as the Clavicles of King Solomon, Book 3, in one of the French manuscripts S. L. McGregor Mathers incorporated in his version of the Key of Solomon, but it was omitted from the key with his explanation. That apparently at the end there are some short extracts from the Grimorium Verum with the seals of evil spirits, which, as they do not belong to the Key of Solomon proper, I have not given. For the evident classification of the key is in 2 books and no more. I just love feuds. Adri Shaw also published some of it in The Secret Lore of Magic, the Book of Sorcerers in 1957. Alrighty, time to break down all 4 books. So book 1 is described as concerning the character of demons, particularly the superior spirits of Lucifer, Beelzebub, Astaroth, while also including the many inferior spirits below them and their invoking sigils. Who wants to hear about what all the lesser spirits can do? Klonek has the power to bring money to those who make a pact with him. Musicin has power over important people and politicians. Frymost has power over women. Kleppoth can help you experience all sorts of dreams and visions. Kill can manifest dramatic situations and changes. Mersild has dominion over long and short distance travel. Clisthert can create confusion or enlightenment, depending on what you need. Serchade can make you see all sorts of natural and supernatural creatures. Hickpath can make a person think of you, no matter how far or distant they may be. Humans can bring you any book you desire. Seagal will cause all sorts of prodigies to appear. Brucissier can teach you the art of necromancy. Guland causes all illnesses. Sergak can create every kind of opportunity for advancement. Morael can help you move about unseen. Fruitimier prepares all kinds of feasts for you. Huiki Tigras, I tried, causes sleep in the case of some and insomnia in others. Tempting. I could use a good night's sleep. Book 2 is simply described as being of planetary hours, so I'll leave that up to y'all to interpret what you think it means. Book 3 is the preparation of the operator, or more simply put, how to prepare for summoning. A more modern title could be, Demon Summoning for Dummies, or How to Summon a Demon 101. Just saying. Book 4 contains the Sanctum Regnum, called the Royalty of Spirits, or the Little Key of Solomon, a most learned Hebraic necromancer and rabbi. Gee, where have I referenced that before? This book contains various combinations of characters where the powers can be invoked or brought forth whensoever you may wish, each according to his faculty. Long story short, it's a very descriptive and thorough demon summoning Bible, if you will. Once again, I personally do not recommend summoning demons, but if you really feel like you must, this feels like it would produce safer outcomes than, say, a random YouTube ritual or Ouija board. Okay, anything's better than a cursed board, but this one I feel like I can kind of endorse and still sleep at night, you know? In first place, we have the Munich Manual of Demonic Magic. The MMDM, or Libel Incantionum, Exorcismorium e Fascinatorium Variarium, is a 15th century grimoire manuscript. The text, composed in Latin, is largely concerned with demonology and necromancy. Richard Cipher edited the text of the manuscript in 1998 under the title Forbidden Rites, a necromancer's manual of the 15th century. Portions of the text in English translation are presented in Forbidden Rites as well, embedded within the author's essays and explanations on the Munich Manual in specific and grimoires in general. The Russian translation of this Latin grimoire was published in 2019, while the first English translation was published in only 2023. There is only one known surviving manuscript of the original Munich Manual, which is almost complete, except for the first 2 folios that describe the beginning of the first ritual. The rest of the grimoire contains complete instructions for the invocation of demons, such as Satan, Lilith, Astaroth, and Samael, as well as the supposed attainment of favors and supernatural powers from them. Some of the spells allow for obtaining the love of a woman, achieving invisibility, acquiring wealth and treasures, or gaining knowledge. The text is accompanied by over 40 illustrations of magic circles and symbols to be used in the ritual. Pages 130 to 133 of the text include a list of 11 demons, similar to the one from the Ars Goetia. Since there are only 11, I suppose I could list them all off. Count/Duke Barbarous, Duke Cassin, President/Count Odious, King Curson, Duke Alugor, Prince Teob, President Fulak, Duke Generon, Marquis Tuvaris, and President Hani. Oh, and Marquis Sukax. I promise I did my best with pronunciations. Most of the text is in Latin, with the exception of 2 appended materials in German and Italian. Makes sense to me. Anyone feel like learning a dead language?